Have you ever caught yourself acting a certain way or maybe hiding a specific behavior? Not because anyone actually told you to, but just because it's what we consider, normal? We literally all do it. But who exactly decides what normal is? And how on earth does that invisible standard get inside our heads? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're exploring the invisible architecture of society by looking at the brilliant and honestly sometimes unsettling blueprint laid out by the philosopher Michel Foucault. Now, he didn't look at physical buildings. Instead, he mapped the hidden structures of power and knowledge that shape exactly who we are.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the architecture of Foucault, then move right into rethinking power, examine knowledge and truth, look at the body as a political site, and finally, we'll explore the panopticon. All right, Section 1, the architecture of Foucault, core concepts. To truly grasp his perspective on modern society, we really have to build his philosophy piece by piece. Let's start with the interlocking pillars that hold the whole thing up.
Foucault's analysis rests on four core theoretical concepts: power, knowledge, discourse, and the body. And it's super important to note that these aren't just separate ideas. They are deeply, deeply interconnected. Power flows through networks. Knowledge is totally inseparable from that power. Discourse defines what we can even think or say about the world. And the body? Well, that's the actual physical site where all of this social control is applied. Foucault used this exact framework to analyze how modern society regulates individuals through massive institutions, places like medicine, psychiatry, and the prison system.
Moving on to Section 2, rethinking power, a new paradigm. To understand how these pillars work together, we first have to completely tear down our old traditional idea of what power actually means and rebuild it from the ground up.
Traditionally, we tend to think of power kind of like a commodity. It's top-down, right? A king, a president, maybe a judge holds it, and they use it to repress people, basically to say no or to punish. But Foucault rejects this entirely. For him, power is relational and circulatory. It moves through networks of relationships at literally every single level of society. It's in our schools, our hospitals, even our everyday conversations. And here is the real paradigm shift. Foucauldian power is highly productive. It doesn't just stop you from doing things. It actively produces your reality. It shapes your identities, your deepest desires, and your everyday behaviors. This brings us to Section 3, knowledge and truth, power/knowledge. So if power is a network that produces our reality, we've got to look at the invisible walls of this architecture. Where do our deeply held truths actually come from? Foucault coined a really clever compound term for this: Pouvoir, Savoir, or power/knowledge. He argues that power and knowledge are mutually constitutive. Basically, you absolutely cannot have one without the other. See, truth isn't just some neutral discovery waiting for us out in nature. Instead, truth is produced through historically specific relations of power. The folks who hold power, like scientific institutions, medical boards, or the psychiatric profession, they get to determine what counts as legitimate knowledge. And in turn, that expert knowledge justifies and extends their power over the rest of us. Every society maintains what Foucault calls a regime of truth. This is an institutionally sanctioned system that dictates what is accepted as absolutely, unquestionably true. And that brings us to another critical piece of Foucault's architecture: the episteme and the concept of discourse. Discourse refers to the systems of language and practices that define the boundaries of what can be meaningfully said or known about a subject. Discourses actually construct our reality. They make historically specific ideas appear completely natural or just common sense. And the episteme? That's the underlying unconscious structure of knowledge in a specific era. Think of it like the operating system of a society. It dictates the very possibilities of thought. For example, our sources note how the common sense premise that the world consists strictly of men and women led psychiatry in the 1970s to create diagnoses to literally treat children who didn't conform to prevailing gender norms. That right there is discourse and power constructing reality.
Let's head into Section 4, the body as political site, mechanisms of discipline. We have the network of power and the invisible walls of knowledge. Now let's look at the actual physical inhabitants of this architecture, human bodies. For Foucault, the human body is very much a political site. It's the primary target of social control. Institutions like hospitals, schools, factories, and prisons use specific mechanisms to inscribe social norms directly onto our bodies. There are three main mechanisms of this discipline. First up is hierarchical observation, basically keeping subjects constantly visible to authority. Second is normalizing judgment, marking and correcting any tiny deviation from the standard norm. And third, the examination. This combines surveillance with knowledge gathering, kind of like taking a medical test or a school exam. Through these practices, institutions aim to produce what Foucault called docile bodies. These are bodies that are obedient, highly productive, and completely self-regulating.
But while discipline targets the individual body, power also operates at a massive, population-wide scale. This is what Foucault calls biopower. Emerging in the late 18th century, biopower is basically the state's regulation of entire populations through the management of health, birth rates, mortality, and life itself. So, instead of the ancient sovereign power that focused on the right to kill people, biopower focuses on the power to foster and manage life. The biological features of the human species literally become the direct object of a political strategy. Which brings us to a really fascinating question. If power isn't just a king threatening you with a sword, and if it's woven into our medical systems, our schools, and our very concept of truth, who is actually policing you when no one is watching? How does power get inside our heads?
That brings us to Section 5, the panopticon, surveillance system. The answer to that question lies in the final overarching structure we all live inside. This all builds into the concept of panopticism, which is based on philosopher Jeremy Bentham's architectural design for an ideal prison, the panopticon. I want you to picture a circular building with a guard tower in the dead center. The cells are backlit, so the guard can clearly see every prisoner's silhouette. But the prisoners cannot see into the tower. This setup creates three distinct mechanics. 1. Constant potential visibility by authority. 2. The total inability to verify if you are actually being watched at any given moment. Because the prisoner never knows for sure if the guard is looking, they have to assume they're always being watched. Which leads us to step 3, the internalization of discipline. The prisoners begin to police themselves. They literally become their own guards. Foucault argues that this visible but unverifiable power ensures we conform to society's norms without any physical force being applied at all. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
All right, let's synthesize all these complex takeaways. Foucault's architecture reveals a world where power is relational and flows through every single institution. Knowledge is never just neutral, it is always deeply political and embedded right in those power structures. The body isn't just a biological thing, it is a political site subject to training, discipline, and biopower. But there's a crucial final piece here, and that is resistance. Because power is a network, Foucault believed that resistance is always possible. We resist by exposing these regimes of truth and by actively questioning the knowledge that society tells us is simply natural or common sense.
And that leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful quote from Michel Foucault. Truth is a thing of this world. It is produced only by virtue of multiple forms of constraint. So the next time you encounter a hard and fast rule about how you should behave, what is considered medically normal, or what is fundamentally true, I challenge you to ask yourself, who constructed this truth, and exactly what structures of power is it serving? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep questioning the invisible architecture around you.